President, thank you. I'm happy to rise today to speak about the three trade agreements that are working their way over to the Senate at a time when unemployment is over 9% and we have over 14 million Americans out of work. It's past time for us to take up these three important agreements. These agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama are going to create jobs and put Americans back to work. And that's why it's so important we move on a bipartisan basis to get them done. With 95% of consumers living outside of our borders, we need to proactively help American workers, farmers, service providers sell their products all around the world. The President himself has said that repeatedly. Just last month, he came to Ohio, and he said he wants to be sure that more products are stamped with the three proud words, "Made in America." I couldn't agree with him more. And one way to do that is to get these trade agreements done. Finally, we have the opportunity to vote on them. And this will help us to gain market access for U.S. workers to about 100 million consumers. Unfortunately, while these agreements have been sitting on the shelf for over 4 years, our workers, our farmers, our service providers have lost market share. They've fallen behind because other countries have completed agreements, and their workers and their farmers, their service providers, have gained market share that we should have had. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, by waiting for 4 years to take up these agreements, American workers have lost over $12 billion in wages. So I'm glad the agreements are here. They should have been here sooner. And again, this to me should be a lesson that we learn as the United States Congress, United States Senate. We need to have more agreements, and we need to have them negotiated constantly on behalf of our businesses and our workers. While we've waited for the President to submit these agreements to Congress for a vote, other countries have moved forward, and they've gained footholds in other markets. The European Union and Korea, along with Canada and Colombia, have negotiated, completed, and put into force their own trade agreements that they started to negotiate after we were done with ours. In other words, we finished our negotiations. They then began negotiations. They've already ratified their agreements, and they're now, in effect, taking market share away from us. We've seen the U.S. market share be reduced in Colombia and in Korea because of these agreements. A good example would be our exports of agricultural products to Colombia. We've seen them drop from 70% of the market for corn, wheat, and soybeans to less than 30% of the market, just since we completed the agreement with Colombia. Because again, the President did not send these agreements forward for ratification. We have been on the sidelines while farmers in my state and around the country have lost out. We're falling behind Korea also. When we started discussing an agreement with Korea, the United States was Korea's biggest trading partner. Since then, we have slid down the ladder, with China, Japan, and the European Union jumping ahead of us. According to the U.S. Trade Representative's office, in just over a decade, our share of Korea's goods imports has fallen from 21% of their market to 9% of their market, while China's share of the Korean market has increased from 7% to 17%. So we're now at 9%, China's now at 17%. Now this has happened, again, since we began the negotiations or discussions about negotiations with Korea. By standing still, we're still allowing China and our competitors to get a leg up in this crucial Asian market. According to the President's own metrics, these three agreements together will create over 250,000 new jobs. Conversely, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, if we fail to move forward on these agreements, we would lose 380,000 jobs. Again, because we would lose market share that we already have to these other countries that are negotiating agreements while we sit on the sidelines. The nonpartisan U.S. International Trade Commission says these three agreements will increase U.S. goods exports by nearly $13 billion each year. When I was the U.S. Trade Representative, I had the privilege of launching the Korea Agreement, actually in a room right next to the chamber. That agreement is called KORUS, K-O-R-U-S. I did so with Korean Trade Minister Kim in February of 2006. At that time, many people said this agreement would be very difficult to negotiate. Some criticized us for launching it, thinking this economy was too big, too complicated, and we would not be able to come to a meaningful agreement. But we took the chance because we saw the incredible potential for trade liberalization that would drive greater economic growth in the United States and U.S. job creation, and also because of the importance of the alliance with the Republic of Korea. Turns out the skeptics were wrong. And we now have before us this week to vote in the United States Senate the largest export agreement, largest free trade agreement that this Congress has looked at in almost 2 decades. Korea is a vital market for U.S. exports already. It's America's seventh largest trading partner, and their economy is now growing by more than 6% per year. KORUS eliminates tariffs on over 95% of U.S. exports of industrial and consumer goods to Korea within the first 5 years of the agreement. The agreement's intellectual property rights provision contains stringent protections for American intellectual property, extremely important to some of our service companies and other exporters. The agreement also gives American companies additional access to Korea's $850 billion services market. America has a large trade surplus, actually, in services right now, both globally and with Korea, and this agreement will allow America's service companies that are the best in the world to expand and sell more products to a country of 48 million people. KORUS is supported by the United Auto Workers, the United States Chamber of Commerce, and many other business and export-related groups. Let me read an excerpt, if I could, from the United Auto Workers statement earlier this year about the Korean agreement. The UAW said that the Korean agreement and related auto provisions, quote, will protect current American auto jobs, will grow American auto industry jobs, and includes labor and environmental commitments, and has important enforcement mechanisms. The KORUS agreement opens an important market for American farmers and ranchers as well. According to the International Trade Commission, KORUS will expand American agricultural exports by $1.9 billion to $3.8 billion per year. In my own state of Ohio, KORUS, along with Panama and Colombia, will increase agricultural exports by nearly $55 million annually, just for Ohio. KORUS will eventually phase out the 40% Korean tariff on U.S. beef and will immediately eliminate the 5% Korean tariff on soybeans, resulting in a $3 million annual increase in Ohio soybean exports. Soybeans are the biggest export crop in Ohio. In fact, 1 out of every 2 acres in Ohio of soybeans is planted now for export. KORUS also opens the door for American manufacturing jobs. In Ohio, over 25% of manufacturing jobs now depend on exports. Over $31 billion of U.S. manufactured goods were exported to Korea last year. In fact, Korea was our fastest growing export destination in the world, with a 37% increase over 2009. When American manufactured goods are exported to Korea, they face an average tariff now of about 9%. With passage of this agreement, this 9% tariff will fall to 0, and in most cases immediately. However, due to this agreement we talked about earlier between the European Union and Korea going into force about 100 days ago on July 1st, EU exports to Korea are now on the rise because more than 90% of their goods can now enter Korea duty-free. So again, it's important that we move forward and move forward quickly to avoid losing more market share, which is difficult for us to regain. The Cleveland Plain Dealer wrote an editorial recently entitled, "Korea Free Trade Deal Will Help U.S. and Ohio." This piece talked about the benefits of the Korean agreement, particularly for manufacturers and auto workers. The editorial concluded by saying, quote, "Trade can help drive recovery. This deal with a longtime ally will help." They are right. Another important agreement is the U.S.-Colombian Trade Promotion Agreement. Colombia is a growing economy in Central and South America to which the United States exported over $121 million in goods last year. This agreement with Colombia is a clear victory for U.S. workers. Due to preference programs that are already in place, nearly 90% of the exports from Colombia to the United States come in duty-free. So we largely have a one-way free trade agreement with Colombia already. Due to these preference programs, this agreement will be a huge benefit to U.S. workers and U.S. businesses because U.S. exports to Colombia have faced an average tariff of about 14%. So historically, 90% of theirs have come in duty-free, while ours face much higher tariffs when they enter Colombia. This isn't fair trade. This agreement will fix that. It'll be sure that the one-way trade that advantages Colombian exports instead of American exports is balanced. The agreement will lower the 14% average Colombian tariff to 0, allowing over 80% of U.S. consumer and industrial products exported to Colombia to become duty-free immediately. The agreement also immediately eliminates duties on about 70% of U.S. farm exports, including soybeans, wheat, barley, flour, and beef. It also establishes new transparency rules on non-tariff barriers to trade. In other words, not a higher tariff, but other barriers in the country, so-called non-tariff barriers that keep our products out. Further, it establishes new commitments on environment and labor, an area in which Colombia is improving and proactively addressing. The agreement also protects U.S. intellectual property with enhanced protection for copyrighted entertainment products, software, and U.S. trademarks. Finally, we have an important agreement with Colombia's Latin American neighbor, Panama, another key ally to the United States. Panama is one of the fastest-growing economies in Latin America, and $46 million in U.S. Ohio goods were exported to Colombia last year. It's a vital strategic partner for the United States, since nearly two-thirds of the Panama Canal's annual transits are either from or to U.S. ports. Moreover, the ongoing $5 billion Panama Canal expansion project presents unique opportunities for American exporters. Give you one example. Rockwell Automation employs nearly 3,000 Ohioans. At Rockwell's Twinsburg facility in Northeast Ohio, they produce controllers and automation systems that open and close the doors of the Panama Canal locks and divert the water. They're bidding on more work in Panama. However, they say they are currently working with one hand tied behind their back because their competitors have an advantage in Panama because we don't have a trade agreement. So this Panamanian export agreement will help companies like Rockwell by cutting tariffs, protecting their intellectual property, and giving them more investment certainty. Upon entry into force, Panama will immediately eliminate its tariffs on over 87% of U.S. exports of consumer and industrial goods, and on more than half of U.S. agricultural exports. 85% of U.S. exporters to Panama are small and medium-sized companies. That's over 7,000 American small and medium-sized companies that export to Panama and will thus benefit from this agreement. Let me tell you about a couple other Ohio products that are exported to these markets. Step 2 Company, headquartered in Streetsboro, Ohio, is the largest American manufacturer of preschool and toddler toys. They employ over 800 Ohioans, and they like to export to Korea and to Panama, and they want the advantage of these agreements. Lincoln Electric's 3,000 employees in Euclid, Ohio, and Mentor export welding products and equipment to Korea, Colombia, and Panama from Northeast Ohio. These agreements don't just help Lincoln Electric export more. They also will help Lincoln's customers export more. Another Ohio company is ProTech Coating, a U.S. steel joint venture company located near Findlay, Ohio. ProTech Coating employs about 250 Ohioans and creates steel that meets the most demanding specifications of U.S. automakers. The Korean agreement will open a big potential market for U.S. auto exports, which will help companies throughout the automotive supply to be able to get more business, and ProTech is one. Gorilla Glue, one of my favorite named companies in Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown, has over 100 employees, and they export their premium line of adhesives and tapes to Panama, to Colombia, and to Korea. They want this agreement because they'll be able to expand their exports and create more jobs in Cincinnati. While these agreements bring large economic benefits, those responsible for our national security also recognize the geopolitical benefits of building economic ties with key regional allies. In testimony earlier this year, the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Douglas Fraser, who's commander of U.S. Southern Command, described the Colombian agreement as, quote, a very positive, beneficial aspect for our cooperation because of the growing capacity to support the capabilities of armed forces and law enforcement. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton strongly support these agreements, noting the importance of an effort that leverages all elements of national power to protect our interests overseas. Secretary Panetta affirmed this role with increased economic ties having a beneficial impact on national security, using Colombia as a prime example of a key ally in a continent with ever-changing political dynamics. And when it comes to international commerce and security, there's no question of the critical role Panama plays. With 20% of our trade to Asia passing through Panama, building on this historically strong relationship will signal our commitment to engaging with Central America. When President Obama submitted these agreements to Congress last week, he said, and I quote, "The agreements I'm submitting to Congress today will make it easier for American companies to sell their products in South Korea, Colombia, and Panama, and provide a major boost to our exports. These agreements will support tens of thousands of jobs across our country." While these agreements are late, the President is right. These are important job-creating and export-opening agreements. They have strong support from members of both parties, and importantly, they're supported by American workers and businesses. Again, the lesson we should learn here is that we need to give the President the authority that he has yet to ask for to negotiate further agreements. Because in these last 4 years, while these agreements have been pending, while the President has not sent them during his administration, and prior to that when President Bush was blocked by the House from moving them forward, we have not been negotiating additional agreements. I'm told there are over 100 bilateral trade agreements being negotiated right now. The United States is not a party to any of them. That's unacceptable because we're losing out, our workers, our service providers, our farmers are losing out, and we're not going to be able to have the sustained recovery we all hope for unless we engage more in these international markets. I'd like to commend so many in this body who have been patient, persistent, and even passionate in promoting these agreements over the years. When I was U.S. Trade Representative, I worked closely with then Chairman Grassley, with Chairman Baucus, with Senator Hatch, and others on the Finance Committee to promote these agreements. Those senators are to be commended today. We'll hear a lot from Senator Baucus and Senator Hatch on the floor, I'm sure, about the importance of these agreements, but I want to underscore the key role that they played, even early on, in ensuring that these agreements could be here before us today. I also want to commend the staff of the Finance Committee, who have worked tirelessly over the years to ensure that we could be here with this opportunity today. Other senators have played a key role, Senator Blunt, Senator Kerry, and others who I should be naming but I'm not, to make sure that we have this opportunity to move our country forward by enacting these agreements. Finally, I want to thank the dedicated staff at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative who made these agreements possible. Again, I had the privilege to lead this nimble and effective agency comprised of remarkable public servants who relish the agency's mission, which is to knock down barriers to U.S. products so that we get a fair shake. They balance this challenge with aggressively enforcing our international trade laws, which is also part of the mix. We both need to expand exports and open markets and ensure that trade is fair, that we're enforcing both the international standards and U.S. laws with regard to trade. They do it very well. Without our negotiators' commitments to resolving some of these very complex and sometimes controversial economic issues, we would also not be here today. So I commend them. For all those professionals with whom I've had the honor to serve, and for those who are there now, serving under Ambassador Ron Kirk, who has also been a strong promoter of these agreements, I thank you for your efforts. Finally, I just want to urge my colleagues who are on the fence, and some of them have talked to me, to take a strong look at the economic and geopolitical benefits of these agreements. We don't do much around here that's bipartisan these days, and yet we have a country that's crying out for it. This is an example of where we can come together as Republicans and Democrats, realizing that with 14 million Americans out of work, we need to do things to move our economy forward. This is a clear example where we can indeed take steps that are bipartisan, where we have a consensus to be able to create jobs and opportunity in the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.